Sarah. Danny.
Thank you. I'm going to just talk to you for 7 minutes about my overall view on this. I published a book at the end of last year called Peak Injustice, which has a section of many chapters on education. So I'm not just making this up. It is based on some work. I'm going to talk to you about students rather than staff, other than to say the main thing which alters the staff you get in universities is how you changed which students you allowed in 20 or 30 years earlier. So if you really want your staff to be more diverse, you need a better education sector in general, and then you will get a better set of staff. And I've looked at academics and their backgrounds, and you can see periods when we were more progressive, and then you get more progressive academics come in for those periods, and regressive as well. We're thinking forward about 30 years. One way to do that is to go backwards 30 years. If you go backwards 30 years, you get to 1995. And if you're looking at the statistics in 1995, you would not be optimistic. This was a period of 15 years of university not expanding. The proportion of children from private schools going was actually rising. It didn't look as if we were going to have what we did get. And that was partly, and as Sally said at the beginning, it was a period of financial restraint. And when you have financial restraint, the first thing you cut is the people you don't normally take. Go back another 30 years before 1995, and you get to 1965, a completely different picture. Incredible change in terms of who was coming into universities in the 1960s. The most obvious one would be women. Okay, still few, but still that was still a shock. My own university, I'm also from the University of Oxford. You'll know when things have changed when you don't have two of us from the University of Oxford on the panel. My own university, my favourite bit of internal Oxford University legislation is the banning of the Corrupt Practices Act in 1965 within the university. And by corrupt practices, what the university meant was direct links from certain schools to certain colleges. You know, and it seems unbelievable now, but that was a period of incredible change. And social mixing between grammar school kids and private school kids and boys and girls. Go back, I'm only going to go back one more 30 years, but, you know, back from 1965, 30 years, you get to 1935, and again, a period of lack of money, not much changing, a brideshead revisited kind of environment. You turned up at my university with your scout, with your cleaner. You know, that really did actually happen. And only 1 in 10 were scholars, and they were all men. So we have periods where nothing much gets better, then a dramatic change happens, nothing much gets better, and what we've just seen in the last 15 years has been a dramatic change. The concern is that what we're going to get is a lull, but hopefully not. One way in which you can operate as sticks, I'm not necessarily in favour of this, but publishing statistics that shows what's happening. University management are incredibly sensitive to being ranked and so on. I discovered this by accident in 2019 when I published from my discipline, I'm a geographer, the statistics nationally for all the geography students in the country from UCAS, and compared our geography students with everybody else undertaking a degree where there are more than 500 students in the country. There are 86 university subjects which over 500 people take, and of those 86, the subject which is the least diverse, and this surprised me, is human geography, is my subject. For every one young person from the poorest quintile of polar areas, there are 12 studying geography somewhere in the UK from the best of areas. And in 2019, we had the lowest proportion of children who'd ever eaten a single free school meal of any subject. I published this, I thought, fairly politely, but the shock, and I'm kind of grown up and old enough, 59 heads of department wrote a letter of complaint in the Times Higher about the way I had done, because they were personally affronted, you know, and they wrote, we're doing great things to increase diversity in our departments, and they probably thought they were, but whatever it was they were doing, they were the least successful. However, it wasn't their fault. It's structural, and I don't have enough time to explain why my subject of geography ended up in this position. And although embarrassing, probably one of the fastest ways to get it out of that position is actually to point out we were number one for this. We have climate change. There's no reason. Climate change is generally very bad news for the world, but for my subject it is good news because we teach it. How could things alter dramatically in the future? If I look at my university, which has had an incredible success record in increasing the diversity of undergraduates, deliberate, it's going to be hard to carry on doing it that way. What we could do, I haven't mentioned this to you at all, but different universities have different possibilities. This country is extremely hierarchical. What happens at the elite places does have an effect on others. We have 100 libraries. They're increasingly empty because students don't like sitting in libraries. I would personally like, and GDPR matters, I'd like to monitor what kind of students actually go into the libraries. They have to go into the card so you know how long they spend there. And then maybe slightly tweak the contextual offers to get slightly more undergraduates who like sitting in libraries for a long time. If you happen to have 100 libraries you can do nothing other with. Or a second one for my university, we have incredible healthcare. We have a nurse in every college. So if you're an 18 or 19-year-old and you have frequent epileptic fits, it's a very good university to come to. And I would tweak us towards that because we are better resourced to deal with students with medical issues than other universities. And it's a way of getting away from the golden child eugenic model, which we're slowly getting away for. Last couple of minutes, prediction. I don't think we're going to get a lull for two reasons. One is that universities are now so incredibly important. They are the major industry in Manchester, in Newcastle, in Sheffield. They have taken over Glasgow, they've taken over from the shipyards, they've taken over from the steelworks. This is no longer a niche thing. It actually isn't the major industry in the city of Oxford. The most profitable industry in the city of Oxford is still the car plant. But it only employs 3,000 people, produces an electric Mini every minute. The export earnings on an electric Mini are higher than the export earnings on an overseas DPhil student. And an overseas DPhil student takes about 3.5 years, as opposed to 1 minute and 2 seconds. But universities are a large part of the financial future of the UK. If we're going to have a financial future, we no longer make steel. Of all the G7 countries, we're the only one who doesn't make steel. We melt it, we don't make it. And so I hope we don't get a lull. And the second and last reason is that we are at the forefront of Europe because of something we did. And Nick was very, very involved in this. If you believe, we're 50% of young people going to university by age 18, but we may well be 2/3 go at least for a day by age 30. Nowhere else in Europe has 2/3 of young people going. This raises all kinds of issues, not least we have partly sold universities to these young people on the grounds that they're going to be paid more than other people. That is impossible when 65% of them go. We cannot retrench by saying, it's only going to be the posh white men or more of them in future. But that saturation and the disappointment that begins to come when people look at paying back their fees and so on creates an environment in which if universities are not progressive, we're going to be seen as having damaged people's lives by having taken so many on a promise that we were elevating them up a social class, which is not possible with 2/3 of the population unless you turn the other third into serfs. And I don't think we're going to do that. Thank you for tolerating me very much. If you're interested, Peak and Justice, the section on education, subtitled Beyond Eugenics. Thank you. Yeah, 1 minute. And Chatham House, because I hate getting my facts wrong, but I was told last night by John Sopel that 5 out of 7 of the richest men in the world were standing behind Trump at his inaugural speech. If that fact's true, it's incredible. The next target for them is not Montreal, it's not Ottawa, it's not Canada, it's not Mexico, it's not Greenland, and it's not Panama. It's us. It's the UK. US money has been going into this country for years, trying to influence or buy or own our think tanks. So we are the target. We might as well say it. It would be helpful if the government realises it more. The mechanism is there with reform and so on. And that hopefully is an impetus for our government to actually make changes, actually build 300,000 houses a year for once. Because if you do not, then we know what we're going to get in 2029 in the election. Age, 18 and 19-year-olds are just far too easy to teach. I was struck 10 years ago when primary schools in Korea began to let the grandparents who dropped the children off stay and sit in the lessons, so that there was somebody sitting in the lessons because there are so few children in Korea. But we need to think about our universities, what the future is about who's going to be in them, because we're not going to ramp up to 80, 90% of 18-year-olds. There'll be some highly frustrated 18-year-olds who do not want to be sitting in lecture halls if we don't do that. And class is the big one we don't talk about. Corporates, as far as I know, do not talk about it. They talk about every other kind of diversity in their financial consultancy firm, but not the social class of their employees. Scotland does it, but it's not a protected characteristic in England. It is now in our university staff surveys, and the results are fascinating about who we exclude. And Finland, I will defend Finland on education in many, many ways, but the biggest inequality that remains in Finland, of almost any, across health and housing, is working class people in Finland do not go to university. And you got to ask, how does that the case with the most equal education system in schools in the world? And what's going on? So class is the elephant in the room. Class meaning money and wealth and income. And it is the hardest one to crack because people like me, your upper middle class, we are absolutely defending the futures of our children. And the more unequal our society becomes, the harder we fight for the futures of our children. And we talk about every other kind of diversity other than the one we don't want to increase, because we'd have to give something up.